Hey, everybody, welcome. This is Michael Bracy with the Music Policy Forum, joining you from just outside of Washington, D.C., and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the Friday, July 9th edition, 2021 edition of Music Policy Forum Live, our monthly conversation program about how, as music stakeholders, we can pursue the dream of stronger, more resilient, and more equitable music ecosystems. As always, we know you have so much on your plates, and we are just so appreciative of all of you who not only are joining as guests, but are joining us as attendees in today's live program, or watching watching the archive of the video. We really appreciate all of your support and your engagement and all your great feedback that we've gotten over the year and a half or so that we've done this program. Today's a really great session, and you guys know that, or else you wouldn't have signed up, wouldn't be watching it. But we are in the midst of a global reopening of the music industry. Things are happening incredibly quickly in very complicated ways. There are a lot of balls in the air. We are, so we're going to really be able to check in with a bunch of our friends and colleagues from across the globe just to get a sense of what's happening and where things are. Before we bring in our guests, though, I want to flag a couple of things as we do, kind of each program, to just make sure that we are having the broadest possible lens in terms of what is happening with our not only our music ecosystems, but also some policy and some funding decisions that are going to have a real impact on the structures of our community. And Alex, I'd love you to pull up a couple of slides here. The New York Times had a couple of really interesting articles this week, and one came out just this afternoon related to an executive order from President Biden looking at a whole host of policies related to competition across industries. And the executive order is interesting because there's things that he's encouraging the government to do that he cannot do by executive order. For example, he is requesting the Federal Communications Commission reinstate net neutrality rules. For those of you who have followed this work for a long time, we feel very strongly net neutrality is very important to sort of preserving the potential for future innovation in the music community in ways that can benefit musicians and the broader ecosystem. But this language, I think, is really important for us to think about. More broadly, the article says the executive order encourages antitrust regulators to consider the ways that mergers might contribute to monopsonies, or industries in which workers have few choices of where to work and therefore lack leverage to negotiate higher wages or better benefits. Again, that paragraph kind of gets at the heart of a lot of the structural concerns and challenges facing the music community for decades. And the idea that this administration is moving quickly, not necessarily to understand what they need to do, but that they need to do something. We need to have a better understanding of what sort of corporate power and consolidation means and how we engage with that. So that's something, again, that I encourage everybody to be thinking about and getting ready to engage with as we move into the next stage of the policy process. Another article came out earlier this week, again, super important. Alex, if you could put up the next slide, please. Cities and states scrambling to spend their $350 billion windfall. And again, I sort of challenge the use of the word windfall, but the reality is in the Recovery Act, there is a significant amount of money that went to state and city government. Most of the money going towards kind of making up the revenue gap that we faced with the lower tax collections from the 2020 pandemic. But some money is still out there on the street. And again, this article references the Treasury Department giving a lot more flexibility than would typically happen with this type of funding stream for local officials to be creative in how they invest this money. Again, all towards reopening, getting our economy back on its feet, kind of getting moving again. So you're seeing things like the fishing industry get supported in Maine. You're seeing broadband access, a lot of investment in broadband access. You're seeing homelessness initiatives. So, again, as the quote there from Mark Murrow states, there's a lot more flexibility in this program than in previous stimulus packages. So there's a lot more potential for creativity. And again, I think that for those of us who work with cities, who work as advocates, who work in different areas of the music ecosystem here in the United States, just thinking about what do those conversations look like? How are we engaging with our local elected or state elected officials? Are there some opportunities to do some targeted incremental investments in our music ecosystem, whether that's festival programming, whether that's physical space, whether that's money going towards venue improvements. It doesn't hurt to ask. And the thing that we know for sure is that if we're not asking, they're not going to volunteer it. That's for sure. It really falls on us as advocates and members of the community. Just be creative to say, hey, if there's some money laying around, we could put it to good use over here. So I just wanted to flag those two issues. Thank you, Alex. And we can put links to those articles in the chat as we go through the day, if you want to go back and look at them in more detail. But again, we raise that to just remind us that we've had this very narrow focus on how do we reopen as quickly and safely as possible? How do we, manage those incredibly complicated dynamics as we navigate this pandemic? We also can't lose sight of the broader context that we all are working in. So with that, two more pieces of housekeeping. Don't do this if you don't want to, but if you're so inclined, we love to see where people are joining us from. Feel free to put your name and your location in the chat, any other information you'd like people to know. Again, don't feel obligated, but if you want to pop your name in there, we'd love to hear from you. Throughout the session today, we'll be taking questions through the Q&A window on Zoom. Again, this session is recorded and the archive will be available early next week. And certainly if there's something you see from today's session, we encourage you to send links over to your friends and colleagues and just get it out there into the world. That said, I would love to bring in our first guests from the Music Policy Forum board and many, many other hats. Dani Grant, Kate Becker, would you mind turning on your cameras and saying hi? So most folks know Kate and Dani very well. Kate Becker, the creative economy strategist for King County, Washington, among other things, out in the Seattle region. And Dani Grant, the operator of the Mishawaka Amphitheatre outside of Fort Collins, Colorado, among many other things. Real quickly, big developments the last couple of weeks in both your states. Why don't we start, Kate, with you? Things are starting to happen in Washington State. What do we need to know about what's happening in your region?
Well, happy to say that some venues have reopened. Most are planning to reopen this month or early next month if they're not already open. But the big question, one of the big questions has been, what will audience response be? Will people be coming back? And I am happy to report that it appears they're coming back en masse. Big lines around the block. Who knows if that's sustainable? That's the question of the hour now, is can we keep it up? But yes, there's pent up demand for sure for shows. And so there are, big engagement, big sellouts, people selling out shows without marketing them, all of that. So that's terrific. And we had a Revive Live Music event on Tuesday. We stole Mark David's tagline. He gave us permission, but yes, he's using it at a much grander scale than we did. But we had an event to bring venue workers out and to just sort of bring some folks who have been isolated, who had to worry were their careers coming back. Was this all going to unfold in a way that we got our music scene back? And they've just been isolated, some of them, for a long time. And it was just so good to be together with other humans. Have some vaccinations available for folks, some resources, some mental health resources, wellness resources, some food, some music, and some kittens. It worked out very well. But yeah, so that's where we're at in Seattle and King County.
And Kate, we're going to pick up on this in a little bit more detail later in the program when we bring in the crew from Louisville. But just to put a little bit more of a point on it, the fact that the Seattle Revs pilot, which again has been meeting every couple of weeks for the last, last 14 or 15 months, the fact that, this community in Seattle and in the King County region very organically has centered the experience of venue employees, I think is very meaningful. Because again, we've heard a lot about venues, deservedly, and we've heard a lot, obviously, about musicians and artists. And, I'm not saying that venue workers are getting the short shrift or anything like that, but I really was inspired by, again, organically, just how there was that strong community response and the need to kind of lift up that community. Could you just speak a tiny bit more about that? And we'll also get back in this a little bit more, Scotty, when Scotty joins.
Well, sure. We know that the venue workers are the backbones of our clubs and our nightlife and music scene, and that many of them struggled during the pandemic, not just with isolation, but with having to find other means of employment. And and ways to get by. And so, it's a combination of supporting our venue workers and knowing that we're hearing from venue owners and operators that some of their skilled staff are not coming back, that they have had to move on to other careers, other means of employment. And, if you have a super talented security guard you've worked with for a lot of years, that person knows something that a new person simply cannot. They have a sensibility about what's normal, what's safe, what's not safe. So, getting those skilled workers back is important. And also just making sure that that they know how important they are and that we want them to be coming back to work in our music scene. So, because they really, without them, we can't operate. So, it's been quite something.
Thank you, Kate. And Dani, it's great to see you as always. And, it's been really remarkable to, just kind of track your journey at the Mishawaka over the last 15 months. Things are happening. The schedule's full. How are you? How's your people? I mean, what do we need to know?
Yeah, well, it was interesting when we kind of hit the point of vaccination time, the state of Colorado really turned on a dime and felt like everything opened up overnight. And there was a lot of anxiety about how that was going to be received by the general public and by workers and all of that. And it actually, it felt like it took just about a week for everyone to kind of feel like there was no longer COVID. That was my big joke. Oh, COVID's over. Like someone just told me COVID's over, and it's not. And it's not across the country, but the state of Colorado is currently at 70% of the population with the first vaccination. So they're very proud of that fact. And that's being reflected in the rules and the changes that are happening around us. And we are open full steam ahead. I think one of the biggest challenges that I'm facing that I see in other places is just the shortage of staffing in the service industries across the board. We are all understaffed. We're all cutting back our shifts. We're all scrambling to find skilled workers in the service industry. And it's creating a lot of trouble because we've also got the general population who is so ready to get back out and enjoy life and enjoy restaurants and activities and entertainment. And there's not a lot of, there's a lot of disconnect between, the person coming out to the event, understanding what the service industry is going through right now. So we're trying to do a lot of communication with that. We're still experiencing incredible shortages of food products, chicken wings, like things like that, things that other parts of the country are struggling with their meat packing plants and that kind of stuff. It's the first time in my career as a restaurant operator that I have had an ongoing 86 list that is 6 or 7 items long every week. And it's odd things like French fries and staple items that you're not used to. So that's been a real challenge of trying to get back to it, operate normally, receive all the people who want to come out and enjoy, and still maintain that level of experience that you want to deliver. And for service workers, we've lost or for production workers, we've lost a lot of our people. And you see all of these new opportunities opening up for musicians. A lot of competition is back that is understandable, but a little bit frustrating. I've seen 3 new venues open up in Denver, and other, pop-up venues. I've got a 300 cap room in Fort Collins that just announced, and it's a DJ dance club, just announced the Black Pumas. Things like that are happening around here, which is really, hard to manage. And we are all scrapping for quality sound engineers, and we're all scrapping for lighting designers and that kind of thing. So I am excited for 2022 when the dust settles and when our staff are kind of back on their feet, and maybe we've got trained up some new people in the industry. But one of the things that I think would be huge would be some job training and a lot of focus on how do we bring new people into our industry and get them excited about what's happening. So
that's awesome, Dani. So we're gonna pick up those themes in a few minutes again with Scotty and Billy and bring you guys back in.
Yeah.
Now we want to just kind of briefly jump across the pond and check in again with Mark Davyd, who is incredibly generous with his time. Mark, this is like your 19th time on our program, so thank you. but you guys, I mean, again, everybody I think knows Mark at this point, but one of the co-leads of the Music Venue Trust in the UK and the organization that's led the Rivs initiative over in that part of the world. And Alex has put a bunch of links into the chat for those of you who need some background. All right, Mark. So crazy days indeed. So I guess it's okay to have 60,000 people at Wembley Stadium and you have to wait 2 more weeks to do a rock show. Is that what we understand?
Yeah, pretty much. We've got what they're describing as a third wave, but some people think there might be a fourth wave. Specifically, we got lots of problems with the Delta variant, which is provoking a large number of cases. Although the good news is there does seem to be finally a disconnection between the number of cases and the number of hospitalizations and mortality. So a comparison graph between the second and the third wave shows finally that hospitalizations are significantly down as a percentage and mortality is down an even greater percentage than that. The good news is I'm now 10 days away from my first crowd surfing of the last 18 months. When Frank Turner will play our first full capacity show of our Revive live events. The formal announcement is being made on Monday. And what's quite interesting about it, just listening there, is for people who've seen me do this a lot, we've been through nearly 18 months of incredibly rigid restrictions and limitations, very, very demanding legislation that we absolutely had to comply with. And now we are 10 days away from being able to go to full capacity, but we are going to enter that with no restrictions or guidelines almost whatsoever. I've seen a draft of the guidance that's coming out apparently on Monday, and it is a list of risks that COVID poses, which I think at this point our entire sector knows. So that is a kind of weird flip, as opposed to being told exactly what to do by the government. We're now not going to be given any advice by the government, and that, to pick up on what I think Dani was saying there, is very much going to place us between different factions of the public who want different things and our ability to enforce or impose or even police them, specifically on masks. They're going to remove all guidance that you should be wearing a mask. And at that point, we will have people who both think that masks should be worn and that think that no mask should be worn, and no real legal recourse to insist that they should be worn or anything else. So that's slightly weird. I'm going to try and mind dump this as fast as I can, Michael. Jump in with any question you got. We have in the UK, we have what they call the track and trace system, which is meant to be detecting where you may have come into contact with people, and therefore you may be at risk. There are two versions of it. One is the formal version, which is where they know there was a contact and it was good enough for you to potentially be at risk of infection. And the other one is a more generic app version. Both of them are issuing instructions to people to isolate, and that is also happening to our staff. So we've been open with socially distanced gigs. 64% of the venues that were open with socially distanced gigs reported that members of their staff have been told to isolate. And of those, a quarter reported more than 6 members of staff being told to isolate in the last month. So that is provoking havoc, and they look as though they may now abandon that as well, because the app is wildly inaccurate. I think Alex has already put up, we have a whole program, and Kate was kind enough to mention it, to actually reopen our venues, called Revive Live. And we have this week just announced a major investment from National Lottery of putting £1.26 million to pick up on what Dani and Kate were saying, to pay for crews and artists to go back to work. One of the biggest problems we identified was that people had to go off and basically get other jobs. And we didn't know what the stepping off point from them was. You know, going out on a 10 or 15 day tour requires you to hire the van, hire the equipment, contract the sound engineer, but the venues don't have any money to pay the deposits, and the bands don't have any money and no lines of credit left. And also at this point, which bank is loaning a band any money to go out on a tour? So we've managed to get the National Lottery to step in. We are underwriting 300 shows in this first wave. We may get up to 500 shows that we underwrite altogether. And on every single one of those, we're actually paying the bands now for shows that they will deliver in August and September and October. So that allows them to start rehearsing, it allows them to contract all their team and bring them all back on board. And then the final thing that I wanted to bring into this week's meeting, which was why I asked to come, Michael, is we have also announced we're putting back on our national gatherings, our venues day, which we've done for the last 7 years, but we've expanded it this year. And from everything I've learned from coming to these meetings, we're delighted to have Music Policy Forum as one of our international partners. And we will be launching the first ever International Venues Day online. And we are inviting venues from around the world to come and join in and be part of that. We're going to be talking about the things that we all share wherever we are in the world. So we have delegates who will be coming from Australia, Canada, Japan. We've just confirmed right the way across Europe. We're working on a couple of representatives from South America. We're going to put this over to Michael and the team there, and they'll be coming to you, I hope. We have our 3 key topics that we want to talk about, which are ownership of buildings, cultural parity with other sectors of the cultural fabric. So Kate was mentioning there your shuttered venues. It appears that there's this twist again for the same old suspects getting the money. We want to deal with that issue. And then the final one we want to deal with, which again we think is a global issue, is the way that these type of venues are treated and respected by the rest of the music industry, and what's the level of appropriate reinvestment back through the pipeline for the work that we do to bring them the talent they then turn into multi-million returns. So how was that for super fast, Michael?
That is spectacularly on point and super fast, and so relevant to us because again, part of the the really interesting policy dynamics right now happening in the States is that we're doing, I mentioned this at the beginning a little bit, but we're doing the pivot from relief and sort of emergency funding into sort of a broader reimagination of how do we define infrastructure? And President Biden has been speaking a lot about the term social infrastructure, so you've got the traditional way we think about infrastructure in terms of roads and bridges and buildings, but thinking more broadly, what are the sort of pieces that we need as a society that go beyond that? And one of the challenges, one of the conversations that we're very excited to engage with is how do we think about that in a music context? And again, I think linking to the global conversation and the success that you and others have had in terms of how do we really think about and value independent music venues is going to be critical. And again, the 3 points you talked about in terms of ownership and the others are the types of things that we're going to need to be building off of, because again, NEVA and many others have been extraordinarily successful. And again, the idea that we were able to secure, again, more money for independent music venues than the combined 50-year history of the National Endowment of the Arts and National Endowment of Humanities is astounding. I mean, it just is a scale that is unprecedented as a cultural advocate. That has to be the starting point, though. And, a lot of the conversation, and again, a lot of what we're very proud to be doing a Music Policy Forum through the efforts of Kate Becker and many other colleagues that work in government, is to be that bridge to raise awareness and understanding about what do these ecosystems mean, what are the necessary pieces, how does it interconnect, and then how do we get to resourcing it? Because again, pre-pandemic, we all know just the extraordinary vulnerability of our ecosystem as it existed, and we saw that certainly in my hometown here in DC of just venues losing venues left and right. And there are people watching today's program who've lived through that and have been fighting that fight for a long time. So we are thrilled, and we'll be pushing out whatever information you tell us to connect in our community, our networks. This is October 19th is the global date. Is that right? So
right,
people should circle their calendars and be ready for more information, early in September. I guess the other piece, and Mark, you're welcome to stay and you're welcome to get onto your Friday evening since it's so late there, depending on what's up. But you mentioned the variant. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the program. Certainly, we're seeing our numbers again going back up. And my last question for you in terms of just kind of socially and culturally, how the UK is thinking about this. have you just bumped into, have you just bumped into the vaccine resistance and now it's the holdouts and people who can get it and they just don't want it? Are you, is it more the people who don't have the vaccine have mitigating circumstances or underlying other health challenges or other reasons they are not able to tap into it? Is supply a challenge? I mean, what are you, is it a mix? Is it kind of everything?
Yeah, we're at 87% take up of first dose vaccine amongst the adult population, which, me and Michael have discussed that a number of times. That is extraordinarily high. Yeah. We are now really into the kind of people that are being won over very, very gradually. We finally got around to offering some people something for taking the vaccine, like I've seen in several states. Yeah. And the first thing they've offered is if you got vaccinated yesterday or the day before in London, you might have won 2 tickets to see the football final. So,
yeah.
So, but even that didn't really, it hasn't sparked a huge rush of people trying to get there. I mean, 87%. For anybody who knows these things, is an astonishing level of take up for a vaccine. It's quite extraordinary. I would say that on the variant, at the moment it does appear, and we had a science report today that we were given, and it does appear that the link between the mortalities and hospitalizations and the cases is broken by the vaccine. It is effective against the Delta. Mm-hmm. Read some stuff today about a Lambda variant, which looks like it could be more problematic, although apparently a lot less fatal and a lot less serious. But it does appear to be. I'm going to say it's a really weird time. At the moment, as you said, Michael, on Sunday we have the football final that England are in. 60,000 people are going to the stadium, but 30 million people across the country are tuning in to watch it. And the behaviors that we're seeing involve singing, chanting, dancing, licking each other, kissing, whatever else it is you've got. And all you need to do at the moment, because we're not open until the 19th, is put somebody playing the bass guitar into that video and it's suddenly illegal.
Yeah.
So, it's just a very weird set of circumstances. But I keep trying to watch, what's going on. We don't always have time, but I love coming to these meetings because it's so great to hear the enthusiasm there is. We think there's going to be a massive enthusiasm. Our biggest problem, frankly, is a lot of our venues are running out of dates to put shows into. Yeah. With all the rescheduling. We've got venues that are completely booked 7 nights a week, all the way through into March next year, except for Christmas Day. Yeah.
Well, and that's actually a great segue because we'll bring Billy and Scotty in and get a kind of status update about what's happening in Louisville. But Mark, just thanks again for making time on your Friday. We so appreciate your updates and all your leadership and you and Bev and the whole team there. I know it's not just you. Good luck on Sunday. I don't know what that means, but hopefully everybody will have a safe and joyous celebration and the country won't burn or whatever happens in either instance, what happens in the match. But
19th of October, look forward to seeing you all then. I really want.
We can't wait. And I think we all echo Rick Thurman's comment in chat that we all wish we could be at the Frank Turner show. So we'll be sending some people your way in 2022. Get to see in person. Thank you, Mark. And Scotty and Billy, if you could turn your cameras on. It is great to see you both. Thank you so much. Joining us from the wonderful city of Louisville, Kentucky. So, Scotty, I'm going to start with you because you have been the co-lead of one of our original Revs pilot cities. Louisville is one of our 11 original pilots for the Reopen Every Venue Safely initiative here in the United States. And, we've just love to get to know you and get to know your Louisville people. And let's just start with some geography, if you don't mind. I asked Alex, got a map here for those of you watching who are not from the United States or have not had a chance to be in that part of the world. I just love kind of visualizing where our different communities are. So there's Louisville with a big old mark on it. So Scotty, what do we need to know about Louisville? Tell us about the Louisville scene. And Billy, feel free, obviously, to jump in as well.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm going to be a little bit biased here, but, I think the rich history of the Louisville music scene is, it's sort of a secret maybe. I think over the last decade or so, it's become more prevalent. But I started working here in 1985, and Billy, continued that run from then. And just the amount of culture and relevant music that's come out of this city and this region, very proud of. And I think it's, amazing. I really, really do.
Yeah. And just looking at that map, is that about 4 hours to Nashville, give or take?
2.5 hours from Nashville, hour and a half from Indianapolis, about an hour from Cincinnati.
You have to pass through here, Indy, Cincinnati, Nashville, St. Louis, Chicago. A lot of tours start here because it's cheaper to start here. All the trucks and buses in Nashville, and they come up here and make us figure out their Tetris in their trucks for that first date, and then they take off from here. But Louisville, as far as, Scotty birthed the scene, and I've done my best to try not to kill it. I do not have a green thumb. And to have my hero as my employee is, every day to wake up to that. Awesome.
That's awesome. And so Billy, you've got a lot of things on your plate. I was really thinking what Davyd was just saying about calendars must have really resonated with you, because I spent some time at the headliners calendar, and Alex is going to put that in the chat here in a minute. So you've got the venue, you do other events, in and around Louisville. I just want to come hang out in Louisville for 3 weeks. The stuff you've got going this fall is astounding.
Well, just our small amp we book, Iroquois Amphitheatre. A good season is 15 shows from the end of April through the end of September, 15 concerts with other things at the community events. And we've got 16 shows in 2 months. And it's a city venue, and, it's a lot. So just from that, with what we have in the club we own, and, the issue that we ran into was, when they pulled the trigger on June 11th and said, as Dani said, Novid, to backfill the summer, which also with SFOG, our PPP2 was starting to run out. We brought staff back. And then with, SFOG a little further, we would have brought the staff back, and we definitely didn't want to send them back away. And we found a way, and they're here. But beginning September is when things just really explode, and which is probably for the better, that we can all kind of get our feet wet again. That we just didn't. Now our marketing and box office staff, they would completely disagree with this statement, because they have been working tirelessly, and I'm trying to keep them from revolting on us. But the venue staff and our production staff have been able to slowly ramp up to that, which has been great, because we're remodeling our room to make it a safer, healthier, more enjoyable place. So the closure that's been one of the silver linings for sure. So I think come September, hopefully everybody's been able to ease into the water and be ready to get back at it full steam.
So I've been fortunate to be in a bunch of the Louisville Revs cohort meetings, and have watched as you all have created this new sort of network called Loves, as part of this process. And maybe Scotty could talk a little bit about what it's meant to kind of, use this crisis as an opportunity to kind of bring some voices together who are sharing some of these common challenges that Billy's touching on.
Yeah, absolutely. Loves was really piggybacked off all the heavy lifting that Billy was doing with NEVA at the time, and, he was just the champion in the state of Kentucky, and, really got a lot accomplished for us, which led me down the road to the Reopen Louisville Task Force, which then led me to the Revs community. And then out of that, I took that business plan or that model and said, we need to do this locally. So I reached out to the people involved in the NEVA, and we got a nice little 16, 17 venue contingent, to where, we didn't have this like the Seattle does or the Austin does. We really never had that group of community. So for at the very least, we were able to get that group of community together, discuss, support each other, navigate how we're going to get through these hard times. It's about a year old now, almost, I would think, I mean, right around, I think we started talking about it maybe a month or two after I was into reps. So that's that, and it's been really, really great for all of us. As I started that, I probably didn't know, but 60 to 70% of the people that became part of the organization, so that's, for me, that was great,
And I think that's been, and we'll talk more about this later in the program, but I think one of the, as we move into the kind of next phase of this work, I think everybody kind of reflecting on, okay, what do we want to take and build off of, and the ability to have those relationships in place and have that kind of support group and support network. I know, Billy, we put in the chat, some of the language that you guys have on the Headliners website, just in terms of the public facing information about show safety and things like that. And I know that the Louisville venues have been thinking a lot about, similar to what we talked about earlier, Seattle, thinking about what are we asking our employees to do? And how are our employees, how do we be mindful of the sort of expanded portfolio that they're having to take on, unless there's a, kind of total clarity about what the rules are going to be. And, beyond the sort of challenges that everyone has referenced in terms of just, transitions in staff and getting people back to work and, actually filling positions. And so some staff shake up and lack of continuity there, but also just, again, rock clubs can be a hard place to work in general. And when you have uncertainty about rules and protocols, that it can just be that much harder. Could you speak a little bit about the way that you all have thought about approaching audiences and also communicating that back out again to your other employees, to the artists that are playing? How do you just think about that communications and the importance of communications with them?
Mark brought up talking about how it is overseas, and then thinking about it in relation to the states here, with the country right now kind of split on states' rights versus federalism, and Kentucky being where it is. We're at a 44% first shot for the state, 55% in Louisville. I can't lick anybody here yet.
Yeah,
licking is not really allowed.
No.
But again, after June 11th, when the mandate came down and masks went away, and then we had to think how we wanted to operate, how we wanted to communicate public facing, how we wanted to communicate to our staff to make them feel safe. Our staff is vaccinated. As you pointed out from the website, we changed it for our first indoor show, where I would expect that show in mid-June, that audience was probably 50% not vaccinated.
Yeah.
But based on these relationships that Scotty has built, we've offered a vaccination and testing clinic up front. So some of it is about philosophically communicating to the public, to the artists, to our staff that we are pro vaccinations and pro testing, but we're not mandating any of it. We're encouraging you to wear a mask if you're not vaccinated, and we're telling our staff that we're supportive of what makes you feel safe. If you want to wear a mask, and we support you for that. As far as the artists are concerned, we've informed our staff that basically when the artist comes in, we're the host, but it's their house for the day, and we're going to follow their rules. If that means we're all wearing masks, we're all wearing masks. If that means that they want to see vaccination cards, we're going to show them vaccination cards. If that means we're going to get tested that day, we're going to get tested that day. With the artist is in charge as far as we're concerned, and we're giving them a soft landing. And it's been tough. Again, back to the state thing, Kentucky, as much as our governor's been supportive, Kentucky as a state and as a population isn't like Washington State and Seattle. So, we're having to, again, show signs of what side we're on, and these vaccination clinics have been well received. We've had our first one, we're gonna have another one Saturday, and now we're gonna start having them out at the Amphitheatre, and we hope that other Love's venues are able to participate as well. So that is one way where we're showing that this is the way that we think we should be headed in Kentucky, and I would love to be able to get to 87%. Don't know if we ever will, but in the meantime, I think this is a long slog. I think with the Delta variant and God forbid the Lambda variant, masks are going to continue to be a thing, and we're just going to continue to push the vaccination thing, because in a GA venue, if everyone is supposed to wear a mask, but everyone's drinking a beer and they're all shoulder to shoulder, it's a bunch of chin diapers. So we have got to continue to push this vaccinations one at a time. And the marketing alone, if only one person gets a shot that night, we're pushing it out across our socials, through email. All of the partners are doing the same thing. We're all helping push these, and more people. I mean, Scotty, we had how many shots at Arlo McKinley?
We did 5 shots and like 12 to 15 tests, I think it was.
And it was only 250 people that night.
Right.
And I think that's a huge success for the night.
Huge win.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we're just getting started. Here it is, just the beginning of July, and that was in June. So we're just going to keep at it.
Well, I just want to amplify that, Billy, because I think that's so. Look, I mean, nobody knows what they're doing, right? We've all been just trying to navigate this as we go, because we just don't know. We don't know the science. We don't know how people are, what information sources they're tapping into. I mean, this has just been, such an overwhelming experience for everyone. But this notion that in many parts of the country, again, it does feel like attitudes are hardening, and it feels like the folks that, there's a significant part of the population in the United States that just like, I'm just not going to do it. You can't make me, and what I love about what you're doing in Louisville and some other cities and regions are doing, and I think I'd like to see more of. I'd like to see it go to a deeper scale. Just what you're saying is that every shot's important. And if the traditional communications, of everything we've tried to date, if that hasn't worked, if that hasn't gotten you convinced, then we've just got to think about how do we get to people? How do we get to people? And we featured some of Kate's colleagues at the Vero Project in Seattle a month or two ago, because King County Public Health recognized that they have extensive youth outreach operation. They're an all ages venue. They've got thousands of kids in the network. Just give them money and tell them to go tell the kids, and don't get in the way, just like the people. So I would hope that, depending on the trajectory of the next couple of months, again, I'm freaked out because I see, yesterday, 35,000 new cases, and I don't see a lot of, kind of comprehensive strategies about how to, really encourage those folks, who are not covered or not vaccinated to get on board. I hope that we can bring to scale some of these ideas about just who has credibility in the community, who has networks, who's got the ability to leverage peer pressure, who can create stuff that isn't, I'm all for a good gimmick, but it's not going to be 2 tickets to the European Cup final that's going to get the people, doing it. I think try it, right? I think we should be doing yes and do everything, but something that's a little bit more strategic and structural, and just thinking about how do we get to people. And I think that's hopefully, we'll see more of those kind of strategies come in. I'm going to ask you, Kate, Dani, and Mark, if you're so inclined, turn your camera back on. We'll bring you back in the conversation. And as they're coming back on, Billy, just one thing I want to give you a huge shout out, and Scotty referenced this, but, people need to realize the Kentucky Senate delegation, particularly Leader McConnell, are extraordinarily powerful. And if Mitch McConnell didn't want the shuttered venue operator grant program to get funded, he could have just said no, and it would have been dead in the water. And as someone who's been, I was going to say fortunate, I'm not sure fortunate's the right word, as someone who's been involved in DC advocacy for 25 years, just the amazing complexity of what it takes to get a piece of legislation like that passed. And it really, it really took a huge community push, and it took a huge nonpartisan push, and working with people who, I have no idea what your politics are, Billy, or what you think of Leader McConnell, but the fact that, that delegation stood strong in support is a testament to you and all the people working with you in the state of Kentucky. And so we just, really express a lot of gratitude to you.
Well, thank you. It was a tough run of months there. And, I learned a lot from the NEVA committee I was on, some brilliant people. I also reminded myself that sometimes it was good to be a little ignorant, like to break protocol, to put every staffer from McConnell's office on copy along with the whole Kentucky delegation. Oops, I didn't mean to send that to all of you, and then get a phone call 2 minutes later. Like, okay, what do you want? But, I'm sorry. Let's talk about this airline bailout. What about hardest hit bailout? And go from there. So, I'm honored that when Dana Frank came to me and said, I need somebody to handle McConnell. I'm like, what? Okay. Made my mom happy. I was a political science major, so.
There you go.
I put my
There you go.
undergrad degree to work.
Between you and Sean and a bunch of other folks, a lot of old government poli-sci folks getting to finally applying their background.
And if I could just add to all that, and some things that you were touching on earlier, pulling together these venues and promoters and music industry people in the state and the city, through that, unlike Seattle and Austin, and a lot of cities that have come together as organized entities, now NEVA is, we're talking about, can there be chapters that don't have to formally organize, that don't have the wherewithal to do that. But through that, now we have a seat at the table in our own local government, chasing ARPA funding, to where through this, people have come to realize, and people with power, that, like what I like to say, art with a small a is just as important. And to Mark's point about parity, that we do have a seat at the table now, and we do have a voice, and we do care about the community, and we can help. And that wouldn't have happened had we not all come together at the beginning of this. So that it has been a silver lining, at least for Louisville and Kentucky, where we're all disparate, competitive pieces, that we all have come together with a voice, and we're going to carry that on through this.
Well, that's a good jumping off point. And I want to, just as an aside, if anybody has questions in the audience, please use the Q&A window. We'd love to hear from you. We've been talking, for 15 months about, not only engaging with today, but thinking about what are we learning today that's going to help inform, tomorrow. And again, I think Kate is probably exhausted of being held out as like Seattle's perfect, because you've got the integration with the, Seattle Music Commission and the cabinet level, music officer, and the infrastructure they have in Seattle. I know it's not all as, champagne and roses, but it is, people have learned a lot from your experience. I'd love, just anybody who wants to take this, or Mark, from a European perspective, where do we take these sort of, organizing efforts that, again, are not going to be, again, a big federal $20 billion program, is probably not the next stage of the national activism. It probably is going to be the local. What do we think that looks like in terms of the next couple of years, building off of, again, kind of the Revs organizing, the Loves organizing, other cities that sort of have that infrastructure already? Where should that go? Anybody can take that.
Such a broad question, Michael. I think probably Kate and I will probably share the approach that this is going to be a very fractured and mixed picture, depending on where you are located and, the receptive atmosphere of government officials to whatever it is you're proposing. Quite often, frankly, we found it comes down to a single individual, whether they're elected or whether they're actually part of the government structure. One person can drive through quite meaningful change if it's their particular passion and they feel connected to it. So I think it's about finding those people at whatever level they're at and gradually building towards that bigger picture stuff. And that's one of the reasons we've been talking about the International Venues Day thing, is what can we learn from each other that might inspire somebody? So taking Kate's example in Seattle, are there other places around the world that could look at that and say, okay, that might work for us in a way that the Music Venue Trust one of going straight to national government won't work here, that actually it is an incredibly fractured picture, but the challenges are the same. And the opportunity to make a change is the same, that we are a much more powerful force now. I'm just going to I love a good statistic. Before this crisis, 3% of all the venues in the UK had ever received any kind of public subsidy. After this crisis, it will be 72%. Wow. That's a massive, massive cultural change. The question is, can we keep it anywhere? I don't think we'll keep it at 72, but if I could get it from 3 up to 20, as a consistent and sustainable thing, that gives me a base to build it towards 40 or 60 or whatever. But, this is a really interesting moment for throwing a magnifying glass on the kind of issues that I think everybody in this conversation has been talking about in our sector for years without being listened to. And maybe that's the silver lining on this crisis, other than Kate's kittens that I failed to include in my live set. But maybe that's it. Maybe I hesitate to say that there's anything good about this crisis, but maybe that's it. Maybe we can come out of this saying, do you remember how you had to listen to us when you thought that actually you were going to lose popular opinion by letting these venues be lost, when you had to take action? Well, why don't you get ahead of that this next time? And why don't you start thinking about us the same way that you think about theatre and ballet and opera and all these things that are attracting government support?
Mm-hmm. Kate, were you going to jump in?
Ditto to everything Mark said, and the importance of finding your political champion cannot be overstated. The other thing I'd like to add is, Seattle and King County, while a lot of the venue owners did know each other, there were lots of folks who met through this process and have worked together to raise the tide for all of them. And hopefully those relationships that have now been established help the scene as we move forward, that people can know how to reach each other, that they toss opportunities to each other, that, when they see someone great and they can't hire them, they let that other venue owner know, hey, there's this really great person looking for work, or this band we would book if we could, but we're fully booked. So here you go. That kind of sharing will just help overall. And I think that we are well poised to do that here, really have people be a little kinder and less competitive. It will still be competitive, of course, but that those opportunities might be shared more easily than they had been before. So,
can I ask a really boring technical question, which is about these Louisville safety operating guidelines? Like, just could you give us like a picture of how have you found that for putting out what feels like central guidance for venues that might have very varying characteristics and very different, there's all kinds of opinions about like vaccinations or temperature tests. What resistance was there to an organization saying, this is a framework of guide? Because I think these are very well worded. I slightly lost the thread of what you were saying because I was reading it so fast, trying to go, wow, this is really interesting. But like, what level of resistance was there to having something like this as a kind of, this is where you start from?
Well, thanks for asking, but, within the first 2 or 3 times we had met, we had all pretty much agreed. We had sent out I think a couple survey emails about 20 or 30 policies that people were willing to sign off on that they were going to do. And luckily, we didn't really find that much resistance. Pretty much quickly, people agreed to these policies to the best of their ability,
And Scotty, is that partly driven by the fact that some of these are kind of like mandated measures? Because that's where we are right now, in a really difficult place where the government's going to take away all mandates.
Right.
So they're going to say there's nothing that you have to do.
Sure. And as you see on there, it's the Team Kentucky, Healthy Kentucky, whatever, a lot of those were minimum required set forth by the governor. We were fortunate in the state of Kentucky to have a very open governor who communicated on a daily basis and kept everybody updated. I like to say better than some of the other cities that we've heard of, you know what I mean? So it was easy to pull from that. And then it was just, very little resistance. We all wanted to be safe. We all followed science. We all hunkered down and said, okay, if we're going to do this, keep in mind those are written right in the middle of the pandemic. So, that's why they seemed a little bit, robust, I should say. So yeah, but as you mentioned, with the mandates gone, what do you do? What do you move forward with?
And Dani, it makes me think of you in Colorado, which went from fairly strict restrictions and, kind of a lot of, oversight to just sort of like, all right, we're done, go for it. And, I think Colorado as being a very individualistic state, a very free state, a lot of strong personalities. I mean, it just must have been impossible to sort of navigate that, and bring any consistency to that across venues.
Yeah, and without the backing of the mandates, it was quite literally impossible to stop people at the door to enforce any internal policies without, firing all your customers, so it was pretty tough. And, one of my challenges too, is I have a band coming in from out of state that's on a much different lockdown restriction setup. And they say to us, what's going on in your venue? And we can manage the backstage any way you'd like to. It becomes part of the rider, discussion. I'm advancing with you, like, what are your limitations and what do you need backstage? But, some of the artists who we're booking aren't conceiving of the fact that it's so different where they're headed. And getting out on stage created a lot of anxiety for some of those artists. And, so those are some of the trips that happened when the mandates went away. I knock on wood that we're all going to continue seeing positive results from, what's happening. And I'm happy to hear more data coming out about, how little of the virus was actually transferred outside, and how few people contracted, so that we can get more and more comfortable with certain situations. But it's been difficult. And I do think that when you have an independent cultural group that doesn't really like to be told what to do, and then, then there's no law behind it either. We kind of threw our hands up in the air and just made recommendations and asked people for their help.
And, we also had this sort of remarkable moment where the CDC, just out of the blue one day, the Centers for Disease Control just said, basically, look, if you're vaccinated, you do whatever you want to do. And if you're not vaxxed, you're in a lot of trouble. And it was a really interesting piece of sort of public messaging in terms of just making it really simple for people to understand. Okay, so if I'm vaxxed, I get to do whatever I want to do. I get to go lick people's faces. Great. But if I'm not vaxxed, then I've got to figure out, and it just, like I said, it just, I understand it from a standpoint of public messaging and trying to incentivize the holdouts and just make it easy for them to understand what they benefit from. But it really just threw everybody under the bus in a way that was really, really hard. And it's something I think, again, as we move into the next stage of this, I don't have any confidence in predicting where this is going to go with the Delta variants, with the other variants, if we are going to see, kind of another resurgence in this country, but in an environment where no one's going to close again.
Yeah. And can I ask you guys, one of the things that I've seen a lot, we have a hard time recognizing mental health and, working through that as a society, and the post-COVID issues that I'm seeing come out. And I think there's just not enough attention to the dramatic effect that this entire year has had on people, the anxiety, the depression, that I feel like I've seen a surge in at least the people who are working for me and, and the kids that I come across. And, there's been very little support, although there has been some from the state of Colorado. There's an anonymous hotline but you really have to dig to find that information. It's not being broadcast anywhere. Have you guys experienced an uptick in mental health issues, and have there been any, real strong advocacy for that you've seen?
We have definitely seen an uptick in mental health issues. It was at the heart of the motive of why we did that Revive Live music for venue workers. And the resources that were provided were largely mental health resources. And it was in a way that was a comfortable setting. There was music, there was food, there was kittens, and there was mental health resources and vaccinations, right? So we had to build an environment that we thought would actually be compelling enough to get people to come and maybe access those resources and the great people who were at those organizational tables. But yes, Shannon Wells, who I believe is on the line with us here, she has really been a champion for venue workers and the mental health issues that they are seeing in their large staff arrangement of folks who haven't been working. And it's been serious. there have even been at least one and maybe more suicides here that are tied to COVID and venue workers. And yeah, it has been a dark time. One of the things people don't realize is if you lived alone and you don't have a family, you've been super isolated. And you had to face the fact that this was at one point posing an existential threat to your work future, right? And so those are grave things to embrace. Some of us remained employed through this and didn't have to go through that at the same intensity as someone who's always worked in music venues, and that is their future employment prospect too. So yeah, it's just been a really, really challenging time, and I don't think we can put too much emphasis on the mental health issues that some folks have struggled with. So
yeah.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah. And Kate, I just want to say that, I was one of those people that lived by myself and have spent the majority of my life in the music industry, and everything you spoke to is absolutely true. I think that Billy will, one of the great things, the company that I work for, it's an open conversation. Everybody feels comfortable about talking about that. I don't think anyone's, I'll walk into Billy's office and say, hey man, I'm a little rusty still. Got to, whatever. And I think we're able to communicate that. And I think it's so important. And it's been such a huge healing, help me to heal, is to be able to have that environment. And the more that we can all offer that soft landing for these people, because very, very important. And we all looked through this outside of some different window, but we all looked out of a window. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to work for an organization that, allows that to happen. You know what I mean? And if everybody can keep that in mind, because one of the big problems is not wanting to talk about mental health. So at least we, it's open conversation, so that's been really, really helpful,
And lots of hiking.
Lots of hiking. Yeah. Billy and I go on hikes together.
Lots of hiking. Well, This has been a really special conversation, and I'm just so appreciative of all the work that you're doing and your fellowship and sense of collaboration. Thanks so much to everybody in the audience participating today. Gigi Johnson had a great question in the chat we didn't get to about documentation and just sort of keeping track of all the work that's happening. And unfortunately, I don't feel like that's really happening. I don't know any organization or groups. I'm not aware of anybody doing that work. And it'd be great if there are resources for an organization to do that. But we're all getting through this and we're all moving forward. And, hopefully what emerges in a couple of years is a much richer understanding, again, in the policy landscape, in the funding landscape, about our community, about our needs, about ways to support us, about ways of defining social infrastructure or cultural infrastructure, and making sure that, again, not to be hackneyed, but when we think about the future, that we're really locked in this question of what does it look like to have stronger, more resilient, and more equitable music ecosystems. So thanks as always to Alex Dolvin for keeping this running so well. Alex has been such a gem for us and got him through Gigi. Thank you, Gigi, for the introduction to Alex as well. And thank you again for all the attendees. Thank you, of course, to our guests. We love your feedback and we appreciate your feedback. We can't do the show without feedback and input. So please email us at any time at musicpolicyforum@gmail.com. The archive of this program will be up early next week, and we'll make sure everybody gets a link to that if you feel like you would like to send it to friends or colleagues. We are probably going to take August off. I think that the plan is to let everybody enjoy their August and reconnect with their families, and we'll be back hitting it hard in September. But we, of course, will be letting everybody know. Thank you so much. Have a safe Friday, a great weekend, and we will talk to you very soon. Cheers, everybody.